I'm moderating this one, but feel free to ask me questions too. I think we got an interesting kind of group together tonight. You've got me, who's part of Guardian Bikes, doing this on the ground. You've got Mark, who's an investor in tons of different companies and is on the front lines of what's going on with manufacturing, what's going on with tariffs, how it's affecting businesses and people that make products. You've got Erin representing this district in Washington, D.C., and seeing where things are going with rebuilding the industrial base and what's happening with the future of manufacturing from a policy perspective. And then you've got Charles, or Chuck as I know him. I met Chuck, I don't know, 6 months ago, sat next to him at a dinner, and I learned more about the history of tariffs and policy and industrial stuff than I think I've ever learned sitting with anybody else. So he's basically a walking kind of historian on the policy side. So I think the title of this is just, innovation and the future of manufacturing, and how matching innovation and where policy is going can kind of reignite an American comeback as it relates to manufacturing. So with that, I'll ask some questions, but again, it'll be conversational, so feel free to shoot them right back. So Mark, I'll start with you. What does the landscape look like? Obviously with Guardian Bikes, we've been ahead of the game on manufacturing in the United States. I know a lot of Shark Tank companies and a lot of entrepreneurs are getting really hurt right now by tariffs. What do you think about tariff policy? What do you think the right balance is to...
I went from everybody liking me to... So I'm all for strategic tariffs to protect strategic industries, steel, et cetera. Great. We need to protect them. Every country does that. I'm not at all for across-the-board tariffs. I think that it's just a tax that disproportionately hurts small businesses. And you guys, doing 120 million, you're not really a small business anymore. But if you look, I've had Shark Tank companies go out of business simply because, the tariff one day might be 15%, another day it's going to be 35%, then it might be 145%. When you're Apple, you can deal with those things. When you're small and you just are hoping to have enough in your bank account for the 3 employees plus yourself to pay your bills, that uncertainty and those numbers are tough. So I give the president a lot of credit on some of the deals, like the 15% from NVIDIA, I'm fine with that, right? But when all this uncertainty in the tariffs for small business, they're not even being considered.
Erin, from your perspective, you go around your district, you talk to a lot of businesses. What are businesses talking about, and where do you see things going in terms of the tariffs and just general policy to try to bring American manufacturing back? How is that affecting a district like this?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And also just to note that he did talk about President McKinley at the dinner table. So that's true to form for Chuck. But thanks for having me. I appreciate being part of the conversation. So I don't hear a lot about tariffs when I'm in the district. People were very concerned and remain concerned, I guess, just about inflation or tax policy. So we did pass permanent tax relief in the One Big Beautiful Bill. That, I think, provides a layer of certainty in an uncertain time with the tariffs that we've experienced. But, I visited Guardian Bikes. Gosh, you had 16 employees, and you were in one space here in the industrial park. And now 250 employees later. And we talked then. I'm just amazed at the growth that you've achieved over the last 36 months. It's really been incredible. But one of the conversations that we had was some of these policies have enabled you to onshore in an otherwise very difficult competition with China. And China is absolutely going to try to take every advantage that they can, as any other country would. But what the United States has been doing is trying to compete with China with a 50-pound weight around our necks. We are setting ourselves up through regulatory, barriers. So I applaud President Trump in trying to think of these things differently than probably any other president since McKinley, and having the courage to do that in a very, that's a very difficult thing to face when you have concerns over some small businesses. That's not easy to do. But I happen to agree with Mark. I'm not sure that Mark and I agree on, we do agree on some things. Healthcare, yeah. But we were talking about that at the table too. But I think it has to be a tool in the toolbox, and I think that we have to put our American entrepreneurs ahead of the deals that we might make with these other countries that set the United States at a disadvantage. I just think that we have to think of it that way, and I applaud the president for trying to change that direction to get some of that manufacturing back home.
It's interesting. I'll just, I think we started our journey of reshoring, the 301 tariffs came out under Trump's first administration. That started, affecting us, and I was emailing Mark about those tariffs, and I'm sure other people were too. But luckily, during that time, Trump was really talking about reshoring. Then Biden came, and he was really talking about reshoring. And the 301 tariffs continued, and then now you have Trump 2, and now it's sort of, the tariffs are in a supercharged mode. And so I consider us, I guess, lucky that we, got started with the journey when we did, because now we're in a position that we can benefit from it because we've onshored a lot of the production. It's tough to think about the companies, who are in that position where they're small enough where they can't go build their own factory necessarily. They're getting hit with the tariffs. I wonder, maybe Mark, back to your perspective, like, what are you telling companies now? Obviously, you told me in 2020, like, hey, we need to think about this now. What are you telling companies that email you and say, like, Mark, we're just getting crushed by tariffs? What do we do?
Just do the best you can to cut back. I told a company the other day, if you have to lay off everybody, you have to lay off everybody. It's unfortunate, but you've got to just try to stay alive, even if it's just you. Big companies could pre-order in anticipation of the tariffs. Apple's got billions and hundreds of billions of dollars available to them. They could order as many iPhones from India and China as they want and just warehouse them. If I have a company that hires, it was a Shark Tank company that hires the spouses of war vets, and they make purses. And they ship the purses around, and each one adds a feature and everything, but they imported all the materials. They had to cut back to nothing. It's just, you don't hear the president talking about small business. He talks about commitments of $500 billion, $200 billion, and that's great. That's great for the country, right? No knocking him there. But you don't hear him talking about the 30 million companies that have one person, or the 3 million companies that have under 20 people, and that's really where we're suffering right now, and I don't see that changing.
Chuck, when I first met you, I actually think it was, the whole history lesson of sitting at the dinner table with you was really interesting. I was asking a lot of questions, and I was learning from you. And I think the most interesting takeaway for me was starting to understand how different periods of the country were, where at times the country was almost completely funded by tariffs, and there was time where there was no income tax either. I guess walk us through kind of what you see the moment that we're in today, and the things that are being talked about with tariffs, and the things that are talking about, trying to prioritize production at home. How does that relate to the history of the country, and how have things changed over time that sort of led to this?
Yeah, so we're back to square one in many instances. We all hear about the tea rebellion and throwing the tea at the Boston Tea Party. What actually happened there was the colonists were outraged by the anti-competitive policies of Britain. So yes, Britain used tariffs, but they used tariffs to protect a particular company's charter. They would give one company a monopoly on a product and then use tariffs to stop any competition. That's what the colonists rebelled against. And Britain went crazy. Look up the Hat Act. Colonists couldn't even make their own hat. You had to buy a hat from the British Guild. This is the Holy Roman Empire did something similar. And this is what Adam Smith was rebelling against. The American tradition of tariffs is pro-competitive. And this is why I'm convinced, Mark, if you get deep in the history, you're going to turn around. Tariffs are a tax. They can be misused. But the American tradition is pro-competitive. So those same colonists, the same founding fathers who threw off Britain's yoke, the first thing they did in the first Congress, July 4th, 1789, they passed the first Tariff Act. And the first sentence was for the revenue of the government and to protect manufacturers. So they were not anti-tariff protection. Now, if you lived in Europe, you are welcome. Move over here. If you can build a better widget, we don't do monopolies. We don't do royal charters to one company. The American tradition is pro-competitive free market, but we want to be self-reliant. We want to be independent. We want to make things here. And so we did that. And Alexander Hamilton, he kind of gets a lot of the credit, right? But in fact, his priority was funding the government, and then it took Britain and France cutting us off from trade. In the Napoleonic Wars, they took turns blockading our ships. And that was when we industrialized. And then we kind of rode that patriotic wave up through the 19th century. We industrialized once, and then by 1900, we invented the middle class. Europe didn't have a middle class. Americans were getting paid way more than Europeans. We rode that up through World War I, and then we started to deindustrialize. So we industrialized once, and then we deindustrialized once. And I'll just say one more minute about bikes, because it's the perfect history. In 1950, we had 10 high-volume bike manufacturers supplying over 90% of the market, plus dozens more specialty bike manufacturers. They paid, in today's dollars, $24 an hour. It was a great wage. And we supplied all over the market. There was no imports. We eliminated our tariffs after World War II. By 1955, 40% of the bikes sold in the United States were imported. It was a bloodbath. Bikes and cutlery were some of the first industries to get tossed overseas. And we weren't outcompeted. It was just Britain cut the value of the pound. So we lost all of these jobs, all these towns eviscerated, and for what? For nothing. Bikes, an adult bicycle back then was $30. It's about $412 today. So bikes didn't even get cheaper. We threw out so many towns, so many communities for nothing. If someone could build a better bike in Europe, they were free to come over here. Taiwan, free to come over here. Japan, free to come over here. But offshoring got us nothing.
Wow, interesting. So,
Now you want to hear the other side?
yeah, let's hear it, Mark.
So one, we were agrarian at the beginning, right? So protecting what we could grow for our own people to eat was important. Two, when we got to McKinley time, that was the robber baron era, right? And so that meant the richest people in the world, effectively, in the country, were running the show. And so they were doing what was in their own best interest. Yes, we would develop a middle class because, the steel industry in Pittsburgh, would hire people and that was great, but it was the robber barons that were running the show. And then as we got into the 70s and the 80s in particular, that's when PCs started to hit. And investors and entrepreneurs like myself had the choice between investing in a bike manufacturer or investing in new technology. And while bike manufacturing was decent business, new technology was the shit. Right? That's where
The crap.
The crap, sorry. That's where you saw things really start to happen. So here we are, because of those investments, starting with IBM being one of the biggest companies in the world in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and then you saw the Dell computers, etc. Even though we don't manufacture as much here in the traditional, Adams perspective, we export more technology and services than we import. We do more of that than anybody in the world. And because of those investments, yes, we don't have as many bikes, and that's kind of good for you guys, right? But other Adams-based manufacturing, right? We dominate technology. It's not even close. And so the world looks to us for our innovation, our entrepreneurship, because we took all these investors, rather than put it into Adams, put it into digital. So that put us in a position where our standard of living just increased dramatically. Because investors, that's what America's all about. Investors had a choice. You had the nifty 50 companies back in the, Kodak, et cetera, in the 60s and the 70s. Now you have the Magic 7 and companies that are worth trillions of dollars. Other than one oil company, Saudi Aramco, I think it is, we have, the most valuable companies, one NVIDIA is worth more than other stock markets all combined. And so, well, yes, there's an argument that says it would have been better if we'd done both. But the value that we created for Americans was significantly more because we became dominant in digital technologies versus, atoms. And what's happening now, we're at, you heard me talk before about AI. We're right at the cusp. Who's going to dominate AI? Is it going to be China or is it going to be America? And so if you ask me, and no, I'm not running for president, but if you ask me, right, I would say more than the tariffs, investing in artificial intelligence, investing in robotics, investing in the software for robotics, because if Brian is able to introduce robotics that cuts the cost of a bike by 30%, cuts the time it takes to make a bike by 30%, now all of a sudden, because we're the leaders, we can go sell to the rest of the world. Because, as you know, Chuck, the rest of the world as a marketplace is bigger than the United States. And so because we made these investments, because we have great entrepreneurs that we believe in, because technology continues to always change and we're still dominating there, we can do more to build here in a digital sense and export in a digital sense. And as those allow us to manufacture better, like if those of you who saw the tour, that's exactly what's happening, right? So those investments now will build us and make this country greater again and again and again and again because of those investments.
Well, it's not the 1990s anymore, and we are lagging. The CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, 2 weeks ago, he's out there publicly saying we can't make cars as good as China. We lag in technology. So in automotive, we lag. When I was young, the top American export was civilian aircraft. And this is one of my lines, globalism is anti-competitive. We let Boeing and McDonnell Douglas merge, and now look at the state of Boeing. All of our national champions, globalism drove mergers and acquisitions, and because they all had to merge, because we have to compete globally. Intel, look at the state of Intel now. And guess what? We're not exporting civilian aircraft. We're not exporting high technology anymore, other than we still have chips are a significant export. But our top export now is oil and gas. I remember when Mitt Romney dismissed Russia.
Why are we able to produce more oil and gas than anybody in the world now?
So we've invented fracking, and that's wonderful. But
new technology.
Because we did the activity here, and that's my point. If you let the manufacturing go overseas, you lose the innovation. And this isn't actually my point. This is Elon Musk's point. This is Jim Farley's point. But thank God we do our own energy production here, and so we got people on site. But when you lose the factory floor, you lose the innovation.
Brian, I think it was in your remarks you talked about China and the speed at which they're developing nuclear energy and the advancements that they've made in AI, in digital assets even, in having a stable coin that's under their currency. These are all things that the United States has to fast track. So instead of taking 7 to 10 years to permit a new small modular nuclear reactor for power, we have to reduce that permitting time down to 3 to 4 years. If we're going to Mark's point, be competitive in things like AI and the energy that's necessary for our data centers, that is my biggest fear in competition with China, is that they're going to beat us to the nuclear power race. And if they do that, then they will have miles ahead of us in the race for AI.
I agree with that.
Yeah, we've been, we're in 8 buildings now in the industrial park. We keep growing, so obviously we're thinking about, okay, at some point, do we lease one huge building? Do we build a building? And we've been looking at building a building, and the longest lead time in building a building is getting power to the field that we've identified as 3 years to just get power there. So then we started looking at, okay, well, could we like, could we put a gas turbine, or is there some kind of like on-site power that we could just shortcut the utility? And we looked at small modular nuclear reactors, and there's a number of startups that are, hard at work on them, but nothing you could really use right now. The big players are moving mountains to get these things to work for big AI data centers and stuff. But I think, to your point, we do have to think about the hard assets, the atoms, the things that, how do we make energy at scale? How do we do that well? How do we manufacture things at scale? Because all of it does kind of play into, being competitive in the future. I think that, just to kind of sidestep the policy discussion for a second, when Guardian Bikes decided to do all that we did, it was not really a bet that policy would go one direction or another. It was a bet that we could be more competitive trying to do it here. And so what I was saying in my talk too is, if you can do it close to the customer, if you can do it fast, if you can be data-driven, if you could use technology, you can really, provide a unique competitive advantage. So in our case, the policy helps. It's an accelerant for sure. I mean, the more that our competitors have high tariffs and we don't, it's certainly an accelerant. But going into it, it was all about how can we create, an advantage. But you also need all these things working in concert. Like, you need to have affordable energy that you can get into a building, and you need to get permitting done fast and all that kind of stuff to keep growing and keep doing things, at the speed that somebody like China can do them. So I'm back to you, Erin. I guess I'm curious, like, how is the government thinking about that from a policy perspective, and what are the biggest priorities in terms of clearing the playing field so that some of those things like nuclear or building buildings faster and getting things built can happen at a faster?
Yeah, I think that some of the things that we're doing is permit reform, so that these things aren't held up for years and years with endless permitting on environmental regulations and other things that quite frankly put us at an extreme competitive disadvantage with places like China, where they don't have the same restrictions. That's one of the 50-pound weights around our neck, is our regulatory infrastructure currently. So trying to figure out where we can responsibly reduce some of those burdensome regulations and fast track some of these things. But like, for instance, I'm working on trying to get a small modular nuclear reactor piloted at Crane Naval Base here in Indiana, working with Purdue University. Sorry, not IU, sorry. Well, they got the engineers, But working with Purdue, companies like Rolls-Royce, who are invested in trying to figure this out, working with the Secretary of Energy here, Susie Jaworowski, for Indiana, to try to figure out, can Indiana be a model for fast tracking to 3 to 4 years, a small modular nuclear reactor that we can have powering Crane and the industrial base around Crane, and use that as an example to scale this out with the rest of the country. It's a have to, but to do that, interestingly, we have the National Defense Authorization Act. And written currently in the National Defense Authorization Act is the opportunity to have a small modular nuclear reactor in Virginia. Did you hear me say Indiana in that at all? So I literally have to go and try to make an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act to increase the opportunity for the whole northern mid-Atlantic, or the mid-Atlantic region, which includes Crane, just for the opportunity for Crane to be able to compete. And so those are some of the challenges that we're up against, but we are thinking about it. The United States has become a consumption country instead of a production country. And there are going to be growing pains, and it will be difficult to try to change that trajectory and make us more of a production country again. We've gotten really used to cheap goods in the United States, but we can have, and Guardian Bikes has proven, that we can have great quality items built 100% right here at home, and that our U.S. workers and our U.S. entrepreneurs and manufacturers are top-notch, world-class, and we can do it right here at home, and we can do it cost-effectively.
Mark, we were having some back and forth on the factory floor about AI and robotics and kind of where things are going. When you think about AI as it applies to manufacturing, or as it applies to companies like Guardian Bikes that are trying to do things in new ways. Where do you think AI is going outside of just the large language models, and how do you think it starts to affect things like the factory floor and making products?
I have a company called costplusdrugs.com, and if you haven't checked it out, please do. We sell medications cheaper than anybody. And one of the reasons, and not only are we cheaper, but we're transparent. When you go to costplusdrugs.com, if you're one of the 7,200 drugs that we carry, we'll show you our actual cost. And we'll show you that we only mark it up 15%. And we're able to do a lot of that because we built a robotics-driven manufacturing plant in Dallas, Texas. And we were able to afford to do it in Dallas because we have a line, if you will, of robots where we can turn from one drug to the next, and it makes injectables, one drug to the next in 4 hours. And we're able to expand that. We had to test it first, and it's modular, and we'll keep on growing, and hopefully we'll be the biggest in the country over the next 5 years. But we use AI for everything. Now, you have to have people to look at the electricity, you have people to deal with plumbing, all this other stuff, but we're able to do these things purely and compete globally purely because of artificial intelligence. And like we were talking, it's going to go from just a robotic arm to that robot or other devices being able to see. And I think the biggest change is going to be, right now when we do robotics, we try to emulate what people look like, right? An arm, right? But that's not necessarily the best approach to be the most optimal, right? So I think you're going to see complete redesigns using AI and different types of robots to be able to optimize manufacturing of anything. And so when you want to start creating your own floor, you're going to just go to your AI models and say, design it for me, and tell me how it works, and create it for me. And you'll be able to take an image of a bike, run it in, and personalize it for somebody in Seymour, Indiana, and the AI will do everything. And you'll have people reviewing and analyzing, but running the AI for you, that's how it's all going to shape.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that is, he's absolutely spot on. I had a recent example of utilizing Chat GPT for, I was in a Rules Committee hearing, it was over NPR, and I wanted to know how biased NPR's news was compared. So I just looked at a comparison. I asked it to run a comparison of Trump versus Biden news from 2020 and 2024. And the AI told me it couldn't do it. It said, if I wanted to do it myself, here's how you would set up a search engine to do it. And I literally replied, do I really have to do this manually? And it said, no, you don't. If you'd like to run the code to do this, here's the code that you would write to run your program. So I got it to, so then I just said, run it. It gave me asked for some search parameters, and it ran the code and gave me a result instantly. Now, without AI, I would have had to literally go back and search their records and maybe go to a microfilm or something. Do they even still have microfilm? I don't know.
Let's hope not.
I don't know. But the time that saved, right? So I agree with Mark. I think you are going to see, the AI's ability to fine-tune and in healthcare, take all of the electronic health record of the VA and say, what is the best medication for a blood pressure range that is this range? What's the best treatment plan for that? And the AI could run it.
And wouldn't it be nice if we still had all that research going into that stuff instead of it being cut? But that's
oh my goodness, there we go.
Mark, I really want to ask about AI. Is it not a huge competitive advantage for China if their LLMs aren't constrained by IP? Like if they can just upload every journal, every book without any regard to copyright?
No, it's a great question, because what's happening now, in the past it was publish or perish. You would put whatever you did on the internet. Now, doctors, scientists, they're not doing that anymore. What they're doing is they're saying that, hey, I've got this IP, I just invented this new way to transplant a heart, and I'm either going to put it into my own model that you pay me to use, or I'm going to sell it to Perplexity versus Gemini versus, so I'm going to put it out to bid. And going back to what I said just before about the research that we stopped, if we had, if we had somebody who truly understood the AI behind it, they would know that that same research that we put in and got the benefit from, we could sell the IP to that to the large language models who would probably pay the government more than they're spending on the research. Because
Although China wouldn't pay us to do that.
no,
They
but
just
China
take
wouldn't
it.
have access to it either, right? So if it's stuff that we created, right, the drugs that we create through NIH, the other research that we do across all the different areas, right, we control it. We don't just publish it. And so, they then can, sell it to ChatGPT and get some chunk, if not all of our money back. So I'm not worried about China from that perspective. And if anything, they don't have the right chips. Even, the president, and I think he's right in doing so, is taking a 15% cut from NVIDIA and AMD to sell them our lower-end chips. The cost to do all this stuff, China is not prepared. That's why they're doing all these workarounds. So I think we're in a much better position across the board. We are the best in the world at technology, period, end of story, full stop.
So question for you guys. I mean, everybody sitting in this room is connected to Guardian Bikes one way or another. Most are directly impacted by the factory here and what we're doing, in Seymour, Indiana. From each of your perspectives, each of you kind of come from a different world, are connected to Guardian Bikes in a different way. When you look at Guardian Bikes, how do you think it sets an example for other companies or other brands that are looking to pull off what we've pulled off? What do you think the most unique aspects are about it, and how do you think that provides an example for others?
Well, I'm sorry, go back to the period of 1810 when we were trying to launch the first textile mills, and I think what you're doing is amazing because it's a high volume business with tremendous global pressure, foreign suppliers using subsidized steel. I mean, to me, it's a very, I would not pick bicycles to jump into. So I would really hope that, we were at the recent conference and everyone's trying to, defense procurement or some sort of niche thing. Well, yeah, I mean, you know what, there's only one factory left that makes microwaves for the whole planet. There's 2 factories that make mini splits for the whole planet. This is really untenable. These are things that we need. And so I think that I look at you diving into bicycles I hope that many others are inspired to take on products that we already kind of take for granted, but actually start making them here again, and then also seeing where that innovation leads.
Yeah, I would say Brian, it's a great American story. From the whole idea behind Guardian Bikes to where you are today is a great American story of the entrepreneur, and you and Kyle and Sam solving problems, right? Trying to figure it out. Understanding that when you hit a roadblock, you went over it, you went around it, you went under it. That's the way I try to be in public service, right? Don't tell me no. Tell me how or why, but don't tell me no. So I think it's a great American story, and I think many other companies can learn by your example. And the grit and determination that it took to learn it, to have the will and the desire and the drive to keep going, even during a pandemic. What you've achieved here is nothing short of incredible to me. I'm so proud to have it here in Southern Indiana, in Seymour, in the 9th District. I could not be prouder of you guys.
Thank you.
I mean, I've got nothing to add to what they said other than keep on doing what you're doing and making me more money.
With that, I think we'll start to wrap it up. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for making the trip out here, being a part of this. I know you guys are all proud of Guardian Bikes, and I'm proud of each and every one of you for being a part of it and what every one of you guys contribute, so thank you.